There we go. Welcome, everyone. We have a very exciting topic today for What's Up, Doc number 12. And that topic today is the grand illusion. And I got a text message from no one other than our John Norman with regards to this topic, the grand illusion, stating, "It is something that the world considers so obvious that questioning it is basically unthinkable, both because it is a self-contradiction and is also the only obvious path to control. Patterns abound that contradict this illusion, the grand illusion. But it goes forward unheeded." Okay. So if we haven't built some mystery in the introduction, I don't know what has. So there's a lot of mystery there to this grand illusion. So this is what we're going to be looking through today. And we're going to find some context and some reference points with regards to the grand illusion. And I myself have gone through my disillusionment, and I continue to do so. I have felt, in my particular experience on this planet, in this incarnation at least, that as we evolve and we expand, some of our aspects become disillusioned. The illusions wash away, and we see truth. Some can say that this is a veil that's being lifted. Others can say that it's just trauma from the body leaving, allowing us to see things for what it truly is and processing things at a deeper level. Others say that the ego is eroding, that the epigenetic overlay is finally subsiding, allowing us to see truth. And a lot of people would say the awakening process is actually awakening within a dream, that you are in a dream, you're awake in that dream, and you realize you're awake in a dream. That the illusion of the reality, the realness, the palpability of the material world, the matrix of the reality that we construct, that we take part in, is real or isn't real. People talk about our reality as a simulation. Quantum mechanics and physics is looking at simulation theory. We have a whole movement of artificial intelligence trying to create grand illusions. But what is a grand illusion? John, I'm going to lead it over to you.
Well, this illusion has many dimensions to it.
Multidimensional, okay, yeah.
It's multidimensional. And what's tricky at this stage is where to start in the possibilities. I haven't written anything down about it. It's kind of emerged in my thinking spontaneously half a dozen times in the last few weeks, and it always touches on another dimension of it every time I visit it again, and so it's difficult to know where to begin this thing. And
Okay.
The first thoughts that emerged from, I suppose, a vivid dream, or at least during the night anyway, and
Okay.
in a conversation that was happening in the dream state, or at least in the sleep, some form of the sleep state.
And this is a sleep state that feels real to you, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very vivid, very vivid. At the time, it's not possible for me to distinguish between actually being awake, having a conversation, and what happened. Those things are not enough different to see them in any different way.
Okay.
But the first time it occurred when in the discussion under this sleep state that had to do with cause and effect. And it was clear in that sleep state, that cause and effect was probably one of the most powerful aspects of the illusion, of the grand illusion, but not the only,
Hmm.
not the only element of it. That the world doesn't, reality does not function according to cause and effect. It's a way that we try to fragment the reality into a little digestible piece, and then start out with our reasoning or logic ability, which always begins with a premise, one way or another. There's a premise, which is an assumption, which is an unprovable statement. So we start at some place of our choice, and then we proceed through a cause and effect chain of reasoning till we get to where we wanted to get from where we started. And in the process, we're defining cause and effect. The causes are multiple usually, and they engender some kind of change. And as we explore this little microcosm of reality, we determine that A causes B,
Yeah.
or A and B cause C, D, E, and F. All right.
Yeah.
So the complexity can vary. And then we might use mathematics, we might assign symbolism to the events that we're trying to comprehend, and get a step up on for future experience, for something that might happen again. Maybe it's already happened several times, and we want to be prepared for it next time. And so we start from this premise that we have, which is probably an initial condition, some condition that when that occurs, then I want to be ready for what's going to happen the next time. I mean, and so my assumptions are related to my initial condition. Or in a mathematical sense, you would say you have boundary conditions and you have initial conditions. And experientially, those are something that we can be aware of. And when it gets triggered, we want our cause and effect relationship to guide us in our response to it, so that we don't get eaten up or something by this, what's coming. And so we define a precise condition under which this is relevant, that this cause and effect scenario is useful to us, has a use. If I see this yellow furry thing that looks like a puma to me, that immediately, the cause is a hungry animal, and the effect is I get eaten. So I'm going to do whatever I can do to be prepared for that the next time it happens. Have a spear with me, or a bow and arrow, or a big rock or something. I mean, so we engaged this and mentally for eons of time. And now in science, we are doing the same thing. We carry out the same process in science. It's more elegant. It's more intellectual and a little less sensory based and intuitive. And we quantify things. We live in a world of symbolism, both through language and also through mathematical symbols. So we have symbols of symbols, mathematical symbols of language symbols of reality. And we have this quantification, and we have this tool we call mathematics, which is of mystical power in aligning legitimate solutions to complex problems, complex mathematical equations that mimic reality. And so we just trust that. This mathematics, if you follow the rules, it's better than our guesses are. Much, much, much better than our guesses are. So you analyze these things, and pretty soon, the entire enterprise of science operates on cause and effect. And after centuries, maybe eons of thinking about this and experiencing something we would call cause and effect, we've ingrained it into the way we view the existence of the world. And the one consequences of cause and effect that's interesting is that reductionism becomes a very, very powerful way to exploit cause and effect as we become more sophisticated at dealing with events through symbolism and symbols of symbols, mathematics, quantification. That capacity has produced amazing, just really amazing control over their circumstances, over our environment. And so this whole issue of control, which our mind and our ego search for continually as we live, control of one kind or another, that something that strengthens that notion is going to become ingrained deeper and deeper and deeper into our psyche and into everything that we do and how we perceive our reality. And certainly in science, it's all cause and effect, and it's all reductionism. And reassembling it, of course, is an important part of it too. You reduce it to the underlying parts and the mechanisms that you think are operating, and then try to gain some insight into the implications that has for the larger scale that influences whether something is useful to us or not. So I think that in modern times, certainly in my time as a practicing scientist, cause and effect was the way the world worked. That's all. There wasn't any other choice. It wasn't as though you could find another concept of as basic as that is, as axiomatic as that, to deal with coping with the unknown future, because the future is always full of surprises. And how well are we suited to handle those surprises? Well, we've worked at cause and effect. I'm going to say illusion.
Okay.
We've worked at the last 400 years. We've certainly worked it intensely and changed the face of the earth in the process.
So delusion as in you're like the delusion, not disillusionment. So there's a difference there.
Yeah, it's an illusion is what I was referring to.
An illusion.
Illusion, yeah. I don't know if delusion, I wouldn't use that word, I'm not sure why, but illusion strikes me as
more accurate,
being what I mean. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That is, it's a perception that something is one way when it actually is another way. All right. So, and in this case, as a scientist, I was convinced that the reductionism was absolutely essential to science. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of different qualities that we face in our life. And qualities are very hard to compare to each other. I mean, qualitative descriptions of things are difficult to relate to each other. So that if you know something about one of those qualities, you might or might not know anything about other qualities. But if you can reduce those qualities to a finer reduced level by reductionism, then you may find the common elements, common qualities at the finer scale exist in different amounts in different qualities at a larger scale. So you can now use the properties at the smaller scale to distinguish between qualities at the useful scale, which is our scale, feet, inches, yards, furlongs, I mean, whatever. So this whole idea of turning qualities into quantities has been very powerful in science.
Yeah.
And it's required a reductionism. So we start to think of reality as being structured. This is the way reality works.
Yeah.
And
So
it
this
must
isn't just in the science realm, right? We're referring to how we construct a reality based on cause and effect. Even as a psychological level, as a young child, we spent a lot of time in our young adulthood, I know I did, understanding cause and effect of your behavior and your actions.
Mhm.
And
Consequences.
consequences to your actions,
Yes.
get the prefrontal cortex on board. So we spent a lot of our young adulthood to develop the brain so we can actually have an efficient cause and effect radar or filter for our life.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
then that sets in, and we understand as we get mirroring in with our reality, that's then that cause and effect mentality becomes the reality. Is somewhat what we're discussing here?
Yeah, it is. That becomes our reality. The cause and effect becomes a reality. And it often, at frontiers of knowledge and experience, it often doesn't extrapolate well.
Mm.
That is, if you go beyond the inputs that you've assembled together to produce some output, right, through this cause and effect algorithm or this cause and effect process, if a new input shows up, the predictions do notoriously poorly, very poorly. In fact, sometimes they produce the opposite result that you would want to have come out with. I mean, and so the cause and effect does not extrapolate well. So
Okay.
you always, at least in my own work for 40 or 50 years, it was always a new measurement. You need to be able to make a new measurement to solve a cause and effect problem that moved beyond what was available to you as instrumentation to make an observation. So this resulted for me in spending half of my time building new instruments and half of my time using them to extend the theories and our understanding. Because those understandings did not work very well when you pushed them beyond the observations that you were able to make. You needed to be able to make some new observations. So what we were doing is a process in quantitative analysis called interpolation. So we're always interpolating our results, and that works pretty well. All right. So if you have some boundaries on some process and you want to interpolate it, you know what the boundaries are, but you don't know what's going on in between the boundaries.
So can we define the word interpolation for the audience, John?
Yeah, interpolation is when you have some endpoints to a process that you're working with. Suppose you know two heights on a river, all right? You have a river and you measure the elevation of one part of the river and the elevation of another part of the river, all right?
Okay.
And the water is flowing down that river. And now you want to, you're in between here someplace, but you don't have any data in between.
Oh,
You only
okay.
got data at these 2 points.
Excellent.
And so you want to estimate, well, what is this elevation halfway in between here? Because that's where I want to go. That's where I
Gotcha.
want to camp. All right.
Okay.
And so you'd say, well, I'll interpolate it. I'll
Fair
find
enough.
a value, I'll estimate a value between two measured values that I'm confident in. I'm not so confident in this interpolation, but I know it's going to be between these two. It's
Yeah.
highly unlikely a point in between is not between these two, because otherwise the river wouldn't be flowing.
Fair
It might
enough.
not go straight, but it's going to be between that height for the river. And so I interpolate
Uh-huh.
the height between my two known endpoints.
So cause and effect would say between point A and B, or whatever you want to label them, that's going to be a specific height, but you
Right.
do not know. So
No,
that
you don't know.
so that prediction
so,
is somewhat of a predictive illusion. Is that what we're getting at? That
well,
that's an
no,
illusion?
so what you're going to do is you know the distance, how far it is from the endpoints. You know where
Yeah.
that is in between. You just don't know its elevation.
Yeah.
You want to solve for its elevation. So you write any mathematical equation and you assume it's linear.
Yeah. So
Or
the
you put it
assumption
as-
of linearity,
Right.
it's kind of the
You
same
know,
thing with time. We make the assumption that time is linear and it's not.
Yeah, so it's, in this case, it's spatial interpolation.
Okay.
I'm interpolating in space, and I don't know what shape it is, but I'm going to make assumptions. And whenever I solve a mathematical problem, I always have assumptions. You can't solve any problem without assumptions. You always have assumptions. And the clever solution, the trick to solving hard problems is in the assumptions that you make.
Mhm.
That's often the key to solving a hard problem. So you make an assumption that it's linear in between here, and you do a linear interpolation of the elevations at those 2 points. And you get a point in between and you say, okay, that's its elevation. That's where I want to be. And so you calculate what that is, how far is it from one of these points, and you solve your problem.
Mhm.
So interpolation means that you're trying to estimate something you don't know in between boundaries that you do know.
Okay. So with
Now we can also extrapolate, and
okay.
this in research, this is what we're tending to do a lot of, is to extrapolate. What does extrapolation mean? It means going beyond where I have data into the unknown.
Yes.
So if I want to do a linear extrapolation, I find 2 points that I know the values of, and then I do a straight line through them, and then I just extend that straight line into the unknown. I don't have
Yeah.
any data out there, but I'm going to guess. I'm
Yeah.
going to estimate, right? That's an extrapolation. Our work in science, our extrapolations work fairly well when they're linear beyond where we know what's going on.
Yes.
But in the natural world, which I worked in, nothing's linear.
Okay. So nothing's linear in the natural world, and the way we set it up is a linear way with which makes sense to our intellect.
Yep. And we can extrapolate it a little ways, and we
Mhm.
might be okay. But if we go very far, we make horrendous mistakes.
Is there a way to become more in union with the natural world at an intellectual level?
Well, I think there is. I think that this cause and effect paradigm, which we are so deeply embedded in now is not, to me, it is not the way the world is actually operating. The
Okay.
way the world is operating is not through the way we gain an understanding of the world is not through the reductionism. We do
Okay.
gain some understanding that way. I think
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to diminish the power of it.
It's very powerful under the right circumstances and utilized appropriately, but you're looking at a bigger picture here.
Yeah, because to me, the way this whole reality is organized is from the top down. Now, why do I say that? Well, think about this approach that we decided was relevant to solving our problems using reductionism. We always had a very bounded system. We're always talking about a little piece of reality, not all of it, just a little piece here.
Yeah.
So we talk about that and we make a lot of assumptions and we establish some boundary conditions and we establish some initial conditions. And then we solve for this thing and we make measurements and we try to make new measurements and we try to understand more about, in my case, vegetation and the relationship between living vegetation and its physical environment. And we're constantly trying to understand more about that, right? We're always defining a very limited piece and looking at the sequence in there to use cause and effect to come to some understanding of the details of how this environment is being modified by the presence of the plants and how the plants are being modified by the presence of the environment, this interaction. And it's an extraordinarily complex problem. I mean, it's much too complex to solve exactly.
Okay.
In engineering, you might be able to use exact solutions, but in the natural world, you can't do that. And you're dealing with life, and
Yeah.
life does not work like the dead world does. And all of the mathematical models that we used in the living, understanding the living world, the living plants, animals, microbes, whatever, and their relationship to the environment, all of the mathematics we use is derived for dead systems, not for living systems. And living systems are fundamentally different from dead systems. I mean, physics deals with dead systems. That's probably an overstatement. Physics deals with non-living
Non-living systems. How would you define? So that is this non-living system, cause and effect prediction, how things work. Although we can expand that interval between areas that we do know, within that space is also expanding of what we don't know. And
Yes.
we're seeing an exponential increase in discovery and application of the bottom down or a top down reductionist approach to predictive cause and effect to assist in exploration of knowledge and understanding. But if we were to shift this, not just with science, but bring that into the spiritual realm, the consciousness realm, because energy is consciousness, right? Where exactly is the illusion, the grand illusion, in this cause and effect at its fundamental level?
To me, it's in the fragmentation of the reality.
A fragmentation of the reality. Okay.
Right? We're looking at fragments
Good.
of reality constantly. And the manifestation of this in science is the plethora of disciplines that we have. Someone is trained in a particular discipline. You know, a hydrologist deals with water movement in a certain way. And if you change the way you want to deal with the water movement, you end up in another discipline, like a bordering discipline of geology or a bordering
Yeah.
discipline of soil physics, right? And the boundaries between these disciplines are often, at least in the natural system, and I certainly encountered this, the boundaries between these disciplines are also interfaces or boundaries between processes that are actually occurring in the system. For example,
Yeah.
the hydrologist deals with primarily with, let's deal with a landscape. We have a landscape here. It's a hill. I'm growing my agricultural crops on this hill. It rains on this hill and water runs down the hill. It doesn't all just go into the soil. It's running down the hill, right? That's what the civil engineer studies, is that water running down the hill. It's called runoff, right? So runoff is the typical thing that the hydrologist will study. Now there's another part of that problem, which is the infiltration. Some of that rain that comes down, it goes into the soil and it gets stored in the soil. And the plant roots mine it and use it to transpire water, all right? So the rain goes two ways. Runs off, that's hydrology. Or it goes into the soil, that's soil physics. They both make assumptions at the interface. All right, the interface between the air and the soil. So the interface between gases and vapors here and liquids, and then here you're dealing with a solid and liquids and vapors, all right? So you have a physical boundary here, a transition zone right at the surface. But neither discipline works with that, okay? Because that's too hard. There's too much going on in this little space for us to figure it out.
And the
It's just too
transition
hard.
zone's alive. That's the living zone. Is that, well, from a scientific perspective, would you consider that a living system, that transition zone between the two different fragmented
Well,
approaches?
it becomes a living system when you start to study the characteristics of the solid medium. Now it's the living system that makes those characteristics what they are. All right, so the living system comes in there because these things are dynamic.
Yeah.
This rainfall, every time it rains, it's different. Different distribution of rainfall, different spatial distribution, different length of time, different intensities. Everything's changing all the time in this system. And the plants and the animals and the microbes and the rodents and all of this are changing with it and adapting to it. And they're changing your system all the time. Right? So it's a complex problem. It's an extraordinarily complex problem. But you have one discipline who deals with the rainfall and the runoff, and you have another discipline that deals with the infiltration and the drainage and the water uptake by the plants and such, right? But there's nobody studying this interface because both disciplines simply make an assumption about what's going on at that interface.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens is you fragment your knowledge. It turns out that that half an inch from that surface, that first half inch or 1 inch of that surface is the single most important 1 inch in the entire system.
Okay.
In the entire soil, plant, atmosphere system, that inch is the controlling factor between whether the rainfall goes in or the rainfall goes off.
And that's the part that they're not studying because of the fragmentation.
Right.
Okay, so the most important.
The two disciplines say, well, that's our boundary. We don't, we have to put a given condition there. Given that, this is what they have, let's say, will happen. Well, why did it develop this way? Why wasn't there one discipline right through there? Well, there wasn't one discipline because it was too hard to study that interface. Too much was going on at one time at that interface. It was easier to deal with the rainfall over the landscape and put rain gauges out there and measure runoff. And this, it was a lot easier than trying to work with this inch
So
at the surface.
so it's a little bit of a pickle, because the most important part is the science at the boundaries themselves, but they're the hardest to study.
Yeah. So, and the disciplines develop this way because when you start a new discipline, you don't want to start at the hardest part of your system to deal with. You want to start with the easiest part, right? So you can make some progress, so you can get some knowledge, so you can constrain the future experiments you do, and then slowly get to the more complex, but you never quite get there, right? Because the living systems are so complex. You eventually, these boundaries become hard and fast boundaries for what you do for research.
Okay. Just to be an advocate for the audience and myself, I guess, I try to think like an audience member when I can. What's the point of science then, John? Right?
Well,
so wave your hands. Where do we go? We have a good foundation. We have fragmented science and compartmentalized science. Cross disciplines is becoming more and more prevalent. We're making efforts and strides. We're evolving with consciousness to connect those different disciplines. But when we have fragmentation, we have compartmentalization, we have those slivers, we have the disciplines not going across the boundary, then we have what is inherent to reality, which is unity and wholeness, which is not implemented and integrated into the structure of the scientific approach to the extent that it needs to be in order to represent reality of a living system.
Yeah. So the reductionism is okay. I'm not anti-reductionism. I think this is the way we needed to start.
Okay,
the problem we face is human intellectual inertia. What happens in a discipline is the same thing that happens to us. We get comfortable with certain ideas about how the world works, and we don't really want to change them after a certain stage in our life.
we've seen that.
Yeah, and it happens in every discipline, and it happens to every scientist. All right, as we get older and established, we have a repertoire of concepts that we have come to be comfortable with, and that give us some authority with age, and we get some awards and all of these sorts of things, all things that add to the intellectual inertia. So it becomes very difficult when someone comes along, and it's usually a younger person, less than 40 usually, sometimes in their 20s, and has a really good idea and has a concept that is going to turn over or elaborate on a lot of the established ones. There's huge resistance to it. There's huge resistance. And usually it wins out in the end, but it can take 50 years to turn over an old concept that clearly was inferior to a concept that was promoted 50 years before. And the classic example of this is in geology. There's a lot of good examples in geology, but every discipline has them. And the one in geology is this continental drift notion, plate tectonics, right? I mean, the ideas for that there were textbooks 50 years after those ideas emerged that still said that land bridges were the way that animals got from one continent to another over the eons of geological time. I mean, and that was hard to get rid of this notion, of some of these notions that didn't have any data supporting them. I mean, there was probably one land bridge in the world, which was the Bering Strait, right?
Yeah.
And that was a land bridge.
We're going to be seeing a lot of this, John. We're going to be seeing a lot of human intellectual inertia, that there's going to be a lot of human intellectual inertia. There's going to be a lot of resistance, because we are now in a time where things are starting to change. And what we consider reality and factual now for us isn't truly factual when we expand our consciousness to incorporate the wholeness and the unity and nonlinear aspect of time, quantum aspects of reality, and to understand the history we have is very minute, to say the least. The science we have is also minute, to say the least. So we'll rediscover things we've already learned that we forgot, and we're also going to integrate new things. And these new things are going to be rediscovery. A lot of times when people come up and they say they discovered something, such as structured water, for example. Oh, we figured out a particular way to make this water that's beneficial. Yes. But truthfully, we're rediscovering this. It's always been there. Societies have known this. We've had advanced civilizations, we've had advanced scientific approaches, we've had the convergence of spirituality and science and its origin, because if not, we wouldn't exist.
Mhm.
The fact that this exists already is proof that spirituality and science are one and the same. But as we go through this process, we are now in a transition point, and discussing these aspects are extremely important. Extremely important. And when you mentioned human intellectual inertia and resistance, and then it may take 50 years, absolutely. Look at psychedelic movement and the beneficial effects for trauma and all these things. That was my father's generation, you know.
Oh, that was my generation.
That was your generation, yeah, right? That got
Yeah.
50 years of that. So it took 50 years for that to come about. And so we
Yeah.
are dealing with a collective consciousness here too, with that human intellectual inertia, with resistance. Then we're really dealing with an organism, a conscious organism, much like the human vessel. When you have resistance within yourself, that's something to be paid attention to, because you can go back and those are going to indicate what you can work on to facilitate unity and wholeness. When you have resistance within a collective consciousness, subtype such as human intellectual inertia within a specific subdomain of an academic field or study, with that resistance, there's going to be a time lag. And part of that is going to be built in the system itself. The system itself is rewarding the human intellectual inertia and facilitating resistance.
But
Grants.
just think of how much resistance there is to limiting our pursuit to the cause and effect paradigm. Look how much resistance we had for plate tectonics explanation versus land bridges. Can you imagine a land bridge across the Atlantic, right, between Europe and New England? When there were hypothesized land bridges there. Well,
Yeah.
where are they? So there's no hope that that's going to be reasonable. Anyway,
Yeah.
and it's 50 years to get rid of something that's as logical as that.
Well, we're
It's
seeing,
happening in all the disciplines.
yeah, we're
And,
seeing it in human evolution too.
well, yeah,
Listen,
I mean,
no,
every discipline's got
gaps.
these, yeah, it's got these issues. There's no way of avoiding them. And so these boundaries that exist between these disciplines are rigid. They don't change easily. I'll give you an example. I work between hydrology, civil engineering, hydrology and runoff, and soil physics, right? Which is infiltration, root water uptake, soil properties and things like that.
It's complicated.
And I decided that I wanted to create a way to simulate what was going on an agricultural field with the slope and all of the vagaries of a real agricultural field and all the machinery used and cultivators and planters and drills and all of this equipment that gets pulled over the surface to keep changing the surface of the soil. So I looked up 20 models for infiltration, runoff, rainfall, and agricultural systems. And none of them would do this because I wanted to be able to do it heterogeneously over the field because soils are very heterogeneous. Just go look at your yard, dig a hole a foot deep in 10 places in your yard, and you'll be surprised how different they look. Soils just are heterogeneous, especially after people have been on them for a while because they make them more heterogeneous. They try to make them homogeneous, but they end up more variable, right? Couldn't find one. So in the end, then we have to create our own. None of the models that were widely used in both the soil physics realm for infiltration and in the hydrology realm for the runoff, none of those models, concepts were valuable, but none of those models to describe those things were useful when you put the two together. None of those 22 models were useful. You had to start all over again to deal with the surface. And you had to include variables that weren't in any of the concepts, in any of the modeling in the discipline, the two disciplines. When you actually pick the system and cross the disciplinary boundary, you found out that there was about half of what you needed to solve this problem existed within those two disciplines. The other half was brand new. You had to do a completely different, a completely new kind of formulation to deal with this interface, because the rain changes the interface, right?
No.
The plants change the interface. What the farmer does, if he leaves residue or he doesn't leave it, all these things change the interface, and they change the partitioning between the runoff and the infiltration. What goes down the hill and runs down the river is lost, and what goes into the soil and has the potential for growing plants and feeding the groundwater.
Yeah.
Right. So this is what's happened. This is just one example of how these boundaries between disciplines are barriers to our understanding. Now, how does that relate to cause and effect? Because the only way you can use cause and effect is to put boundaries narrow enough around your problem, but that's not the way reality works.
Good. I think that's strictly, can we repeat that? That basically cause and effect basically has it within these small boundaries, but reality doesn't have small boundaries. So cause and effect inherently puts small boundaries on an observation when in fact reality does not have boundaries at all.
Yes, that's right.
So
Exactly
boundaries are an
right.
issue.
Boundaries are an issue, right? And then it turns out when you're solving mathematical problems in fluid flow, for example, like water running over the top of the soil or water running down your driveway, concrete driveway, or whatever you're doing, when you're doing a fluid flow problem, the boundary, choosing the right boundary conditions are as important as the solution to the equations, right? Because the solution to the equations depends on the boundary conditions, but you're not studying the boundary very well, right? You have to go to another discipline and get something from another discipline in order to get the boundary condition. But a lot of times it's not actually what you need, but you get the closest you can.
The same
But
thing.
anyway, it's isolating.
But I want to make the comparison to consciousness as I typically do. And being a neuroscientist, been training. When we have boundaries and limitations within ourselves, there's many ways that actually not only is science an expression of our consciousness, but even on the spiritual path and or bringing unity and wholeness into science, which itself is spiritual. And within the definition of spirituality, as I define it, is expanding beyond limitations and boundaries, both at an individual level and at a collective level, And this would include science itself. And the term for that is transcendence. To transcend past, to move beyond, to expand beyond boundaries and limitations, to transcend. So what comes to mind for me is a transcendent science term. Transcendent science comes to mind out of nowhere, but bringing that up.
What would that look like?
We're describing it. You're talking about going in between the boundaries to expand beyond the boundaries and limitations. Transcendent science itself would look to go beyond the boundaries and limitations of a particular subdiscipline. How would that look?
What's interesting, because in
Bridging. Lots of
this-
bridging.
this particular problem where there were probably 10 of us who worked for a decade to solve this problem, to
Wow.
create new field experiments, to do stuff all over again with a different perspective on the problem and different knowledge. And of course, during that time, the disciplines progressed some too.
Mhm.
But it's interesting that that whole approach and the theories and the models that came out of that research didn't go anywhere in either discipline. Neither discipline was able to deal with it.
But you were able.
So basically it died. Okay, it's published in the literature.
So
but
you're
it
saying
died.
it died. Okay,
Yeah.
so why did it die?
Well, because because the sustenance of the knowledge in a particular discipline is maintained by that discipline. Those departments, colleges, they're the ones who are renewing it. You're teaching the young people the stuff that you know, right? They're the ones that are sustaining the knowledge over time. And when you work on a crack, like this group of people worked, right?
Yeah.
There's nobody to sustain it. It's pulling on concepts that are foreign to both disciplines. And
Okay.
both disciplines resist that treatment.
Yeah.
All right. So it dies. It basically dies. It's in the literature, but so are 1,000 other things in the literature that are never going anywhere.
Well, that comes down to structure again. A lot of times it comes down to structure of the system. So we have to reprioritize, and we have to prioritize, simply put, transcendental science, and have that within the structure to have departments bridging different disciplines. And I think this has come up before. Is that right? That we've had.
Well, those things work notoriously poorly.
Why is that?
They don't have the staying power of an established discipline. Because take a university, which has all of these different knowledge branches.
That system needs some improvements. So that's why we're here.
Well, yeah,
discussing this.
That's a group of individuals trying to collaborate with each other as a unit, and there's politics. Each member of a department, okay, each departmental member has his primary allegiance to the department, so he's going to be trying to pull things toward his perspective. All right, and all of the different departments are doing this. All right, and so those are really tough entities to manage.
Okay, so we have to remove politics.
Politics is hard to avoid in these human organizations.
I know.
But my basic point is that we don't have to limit ourselves the way we do in these disciplines. We try hard to make these boundaries ours, make what's within our boundaries ours. This is our stuff.
I used to do that. Yeah, I was trained to do that.
And it's
my sliver. It's my sliver of reality.
But if you think about the universe and how it works with synchronicity.
Yeah.
Every single atom is moving where it moves in the universe simultaneously.
All communicating with everything at the same time.
Everything is happening simultaneously.
Nothing is really separate at all.
No, and we know this in terms of our language and our verbiage. We're
Yeah.
willing to say it, but our science doesn't show it at all. Our science does not respond to that concept. Everything's connected. What are you going to do with that? You can't do anything with it because your paradigm is cause and effect. If you start to think about the universe as being intelligent, all right, it's trying to keep the whole thing going with all of this change. And when you do that from the top down, you need a lot of pieces in there. And what it's doing is it's keeping these pieces together, just like when we build a car. You don't build a car willy-nilly. You don't just throw a lot of bolts and nuts and pieces of sheet metal and stuff in a thing and mix it all up and get a car. Right? So that's the way we treat the universe. That's the way we fragment it into its pieces, and then we don't connect the pieces. We don't connect the pieces in a realistic way. So we aren't even trying to get.
You're not going to get continuity with boundaries and limitations.
No, you can't. But what's limiting that? Why is that? And what occurs to me is this stranglehold we have on cause and effect. Think of it, look at a system. Take a system like a car. All right, a car is a system. It's a human constructed system, which is a lot less elegant than nature is. Nature is far more elegant than the car is.
Thank you for, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and one of the easiest ways to see that is the factory that builds a car is 100 or 1,000 times bigger than the car. The factory that builds your body is 1,000 or 100,000 times smaller than your body. And it's internally repairing it automatically all the time. And your darn car dies on you after the first year. Right?
I call that's the inherent intelligence of creation and consciousness and all that is, right? That's the magic.
And we're ignoring it. I mean, the thing is, we don't give any credit to the larger reality that's synchronizing all of this stuff that we're studying.
And it comes down to one of your thesis for this series has been more scientific respect for the mystical.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And there's nothing wrong with exploring the mystical in whatever way we can, instead of making some rigid rule. I'm just reading a book about a psychiatrist who decided to study near-death experiences. And he was told by his department head that if he kept doing that, he wasn't going to be in that department very long. And that guy had to move himself and his whole family halfway across the country, all right, to a university that would let him study near-death experiences as well as teach and have a clinical practice, all right? It would let him do the near-death experiences. Well, that's the kind of stuff that happens in science all the time. This jurisdictional authority, right, that's polluting the way we look at the universe around us. I mean, I subscribe to Science Journal. The Science Journal is an important journal in the science community. Science and Nature are the two premier journals.
The top dogs.
They deal with big issues in science globally.
There's a lot of politics there too, John, but
there's a lot of politics there.
Very high-powered politics there.
There is. There's no question about it. That there is.
Stakes are very high there. Stakes are high.
That politics, you know, and when I get that journal, they're constantly harassing me to stand up for science and try to convince people that important decisions globally should be made with science. I don't think that's true. I happen to be one of these people who doesn't think all decisions need to be science-based, because there's no wisdom in science, period. And we need wisdom in the leadership of our countries and of our communities and our organizations. We need wisdom in those organizations.
We don't
and
have
there
it.
isn't any in science.
No, but science is the new religion and it lacks wisdom.
It lacks wisdom. For sure
Okay.
it does. And that's, I don't want all these decisions made that way, but I get stuff on a weekly, certainly a monthly basis from that, trying to convince me to sell science and science-based decision-making as the way we should be deciding what we do in our country. And I don't subscribe to that. I just don't subscribe to that. We need wisdom when it comes to putting these things together. And you have to border on wisdom and the mystical when you start to think about the top down. But that's a huge paradigm change, is the whole point I'm trying to make.
It's undergoing. There's
it's science is kicking and screaming, trying to resist this inevitable thing. But
yeah.
the larger universe, to me, has to be viewed as it being intelligent, right? There's so much that's connected and linked simultaneously in the whole universe. I mean, it's all going on at the same time. Every one of these little processes is going on at the same time. Every other little one of these processes is going on. And the beauty of the creation is just something to behold, just in a contemplative form. This is a precious place that we live in, and it deserves to be treated with wisdom. And it doesn't, I just never experienced that in science. I never experienced wisdom in science. I would
in this
like to have
incarnation,
somebody convince me of that I'm wrong.
In the beginning, spiritual, wisdom was essential to science, and spirituality was never separate from science. And we can take a massive, let's take a scale back for a second from this, so we don't have to look too far at it, too close into it, read a book and fall into the pages and forget we're reading a book. But understand and understand that the process of forgetting and then rediscovering is part of Source's aim, to rediscover source connection and unity and wholeness within ourselves and within the creations, including scientific endeavors. So I'm going to go off on a wild hair and say that at one point, humanity already started out the understanding and knowledge of wholeness and unity. And it's not the history we've been told. But going into density, going into fragmentation, going into separation, going into experience, emotions, and limitation, and then being able to heal your way out of it, to evolve your way out, to come back. There's a difference between the inhale and the exhale of creation, of going down into density versus ascending and going back to source. The inhale and the exhale, and we have cycles upon cycles upon cycles, within spirals, within spirals, within spirals. All experience that we have is valuable, as long as we respect and have the wisdom to know the inherent mystical aspect of reality as it is, an eternal source, the energy, the Higgs field, reality, the big mystery, whatever you want to call it, God, universe. And as you and I are sitting here, formally trained in the sciences, both going through the spiritual process within ourselves to heal ourselves and to integrate the strong intellect with the masculine with the feminine of the heart, intellect and intuition within ourselves. Slowly but surely, we're not the only ones, of course, and slowly but surely that integration of the heart with the mind, of the intuition with the intellect, of the wholeness within the wholeness that the fragmentation is within. There's an innate hunger and drive within the collective to come back and understand these things, to feel them at a palpable level because they experience it before they test it. We're experiencing this within ourselves at an individual level. And as more of us experience this, that unity of all that is, which is inherent, which is a God right, a given right to each and every person who comes down, as well as liberation and freedom, true liberation and freedom and sovereignty. When we feel that within ourselves, and we understand that this is reality, yes, there's going to be a heck of a delay between the systems and the science that we behold. But it starts with us. That's all I got.
We're still living in the illusion.
We're still living in the illusion, but we're awake within the dream.
Yeah. Yeah. It's well, there's other aspects of this illusion too, but we don't want to get started in them.
We'll still try to stay on the internet somehow, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was a good time to sign off for the audience. I think that was a really good avenue. And is there anything you would like to tell the audience about the grand illusion, cause and effect, and boundaries with regards to not just science, but how they perceive their world and move forward in their life?
Well, to me, one of the best ways to minimize our boundaries is to engage wisdom.
It's beautiful.
I mean, wisdom it's an evasive thing. It isn't quantifiable. It's something that comes from some visceral place deep down inside. Comes from experience. It comes from living. It comes from seeing so many different things. It comes from understanding the complexity of everything in the universe, of dealing with perpetual change, and the challenges of that. And wisdom, it's something for me, it's been something I've seen and recognized when I saw it, but didn't know what, and still don't know how to enhance it, how to encourage it to grow more and more within. Because I think wisdom, we need to look in. And one of the things that contributes more to boundaries than anything is viewing the world as out there. I'm here and I'm looking at the world and the reality is out there. I don't see it that way. To me, wisdom says we are as much a part of reality as reality is a part of us. I mean, we are not observing reality. We are living it. We are, and I think wisdom captures both this internal life that we have within us and the external life that exists out there. That's all part of wisdom.
So wisdom erodes the illusion.
Yes.
of separation between the internal and the external.
Yes.
I love
And
that.
I still see no reason why science can't embrace wisdom.
It will eventually have to either way
Yeah.
for its survival, for its growth. And it,
Without wisdom, it's like a runaway engine or something that eventually blows itself up.
and that's happened. So let's
And
hope we gain some wisdom.
yes, yes.
Okay,
But
so
I would dearly love to see more wisdom in science.
awesome. That was wonderful, John. And I'm going to go ahead and do a sound off for the audience and a call to action to go beyond the boundaries and limitations and transcendence and invite wisdom within yourself and in any way that is beneficial for you, that you can see an opportunity to do so, to erode that separation, the illusion of separation between inner and outer, and welcome wisdom. And with that, we shall see you in the next What's Up Doc series talk. Thank you for your attendance and your support. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out and have a wonderful interplay of time between you the next time we talk. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.